Hello, I am Michelle Leclerc, Director at Buckham Gallery. Today, I am joined by juror John Seed, featured artist Ann Harris, and our prize winners, Yvette L. Cummings, Teresa Dunn, and Craig Coley, to chat about our juried exhibition, Disrupted Realism and Contemporary Painting. The exhibit is on view through May 5th here in Flint, Michigan. In addition to visiting the physical gallery, this exhibition may be viewed on our website at buckhamgallery.org. I would like to thank the individuals and organizations who support Buckham Gallery, including the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, Michigan Council for Arts and Cultural Affairs, and the National Endowment for the Arts. Greater Flint Arts Council Share Art Genesee Grant Program made possible by Genesee County Arts Education and Cultural Enrichment Millage Funds. And to Stephen R. Burton, our exhibition sponsor. I would like to do some introductions today. We have with us our juror, John Seed, is an art critic, curator, and author of the book, Disrupted Realism, Paintings for a Distracted World, which are available wherever you find your fine art trade books. Ann Harris, she is a Guggenheim Fellow and prominent Chicago painter with an extensive exhibition history and has work included in public collections such as the Fogg Museum at Harvard, the Yale University Art Gallery, and the New York Public Library. Yvette L. Cummings received her BFA from Kendall College of Art and Design, completed a master's degree at the University of Cincinnati's School of Design and Art. Her work may be found in both public and private collections and has exhibited in multiple group and solo exhibitions throughout the South and Midwest. Visual arts and painting and drawing at Coastal Carolina University in Conway, South Carolina. Teresa Dunn received her MFA from Indiana University in Bloomington. She exhibits nationally and internationally. She is currently the Associate Professor of Painting and Drawing at Michigan State University at East Lansing, where she has taught since 2006. And Craig Coley, who began his career studying painting and drawing at the Tyler School of Art in Philadelphia, did a summer program at the School of Art Institute of Chicago, and completed an MFA program in studio art at University of Arizona. He has exhibited throughout the United States and is a part of permanent collections in several museums, including the Tucson Museum of Art, and he teaches at Mexico State University. So the Buckham Fine Arts Project is committed to facilitating opportunities to engage with challenging contemporary art and to experience new ways of looking and thinking. Realism provides an extraordinary gateway that satisfies the desire to recognize while simultaneously presenting opportunities to experience something completely other than the expected. This contemporary take on realism can be more than the faithful representation of an object in media. It can also refer to the faithful representation of experience or a moment. This show was inspired by John Seed's book, Disrupted Realism. John, would you please tell us what inspired you to write your book and to collect all these painters?
Well, going a little bit sideways, which is what I tend to do, you won't be surprised to know that the book actually came from a disruption. And the disruption is in the way that local news is reported and art is written about. In June of 2010, I got the chance to have a blog on the Huffington Post arts page. And it was a brand new art section. The Huffington Post at that time was the first internationally based internet-only free newspaper. It had incredible traffic and it was quite a writing opportunity. So I know a few minutes ago you introduced me as an art critic. I really was an art blogger. And I want to make the distinction, an art critic, if you think of the traditional art critic, probably had an editor that gave them an assignment, see this show, write about it, give it a review. You've got 3 column inches and maybe one tiny black and white photo. And it was a whole different world. And when I started blogging, my editor said to me, write as short or as long as you want. You can embed color photographs, as many as you need, or slideshows or possibly videos. And by the way, as long as it's not actionable, we'll publish it. So it was a whole new kind of art writing that was possible. And I was a small town community college professor looking to meet people. And it was a little bit like connect the dots. I started writing about my friends, who especially included representational artists and a few realists. And when a blog was done, they would say to me, well, I have a friend over here you really should write about. And what I ran into was that I couldn't just write reviews or see local shows. I mean, I was 2 hours from Los Angeles, and that's when there's no traffic, which is never. So I developed a kind of a policy of doing interviews. If I couldn't see a show, I'd interview people. And let's just say that 7 years went by. So 2010 to 2017, I wrote roughly a blog a week, over 350 blogs, and about 120 of them were interviews. And when I started, I knew very little about contemporary realism and contemporary painting. And by the time I got to the end, I had a book in me. So I was really educating myself as a writer. And where disrupted realism came from was in meeting all these artists, in doing all these interviews, in choosing work for blogs. I began to see that the traditional outlook of realism, which is objective, to be truthful, to be like an eye or like a camera, and to be straightforward and objective, I saw that that wasn't working for many artists. And many, many artists in individual ways were finding a way to put something of their self into the work, to change what the work had to be. So when I retired from full-time teaching and from blogging in 2017, there was a show called Disrupted Realism in Philadelphia that I got to curate at the Stanek Gallery. And a publisher saw that show, publisher's representative, and said, this would make a great book. And I said, your timing is perfect, and I agree with you. And I looked at several hundred artists, put them all in my Dropbox, and wake up, with this coffee cup, right? And look over the art, got it down to 38 artists, and the book was then published in the fall of 2019. So that's kind of the long, sideways, detailed change in the way that art is written about story of my book.
Oh, wow, that's really great. And it was after when your book came out and we were seeing your social media posts and everything, and the Stanek Gallery exhibition, or second one, I believe, came up right after that. We were really excited and thought, well, why can't we do something like this here in Michigan? I mean, that fits right in with our mission to bring work here to enrich our community. So this has just been a fantastic opportunity. And I would like to then mention Anne Harris's work. I mean, is just gorgeous in the book, but now that I'm here in person, it just glows. There is just this inner beauty and strength in all of your paintings. And, I was introduced, through online, and was so happy when John suggested that you would be our featured artist. And can you talk about your painting practice a little bit and everything?
Sure. Thank you. That's very kind. Thank you. The first thing I should say is regarding my being part of John's project and his idea regarding a way to discuss work in which he saw a common thread. I basically look at my work as something that I do in the studio, following things that I love doing, and then when it goes out in the world, there's another kind of meaning and understanding of it, which, if the work has any depth to it, comes from the audience, the people who interact with it. And I may have all kinds of intentions and motivations for why I do what I do, but it's been interesting to be in this particular context with John's this idea that he has, because I never think about, I actually avoid the word realism, period. And I think about what I do as fiction. I think of painting as fiction, and what it really is just paint on a surface. And while I generally will draw from life, my paintings often are derived from my paintings. So it's like, so the paintings that you actually have behind you originated with a drawing that I did from life 20 years ago. It started. I actually put it in a drawer and then I pulled it out 5, 6 years later, worked on it some more. And then 5 or 6 years later, I used that drawing as a template to start a painting, which then led me to make 6. And each one was different, but one painting begat the other, begat the other, begat the other. And most of the painting was spent just looking at the painting. And I would look in the mirror for some, maybe for a fact to support the fiction. But most of it is really me just trying to figure out what this particular, what's the light in this painting, who lives in this painting. And it's not a parallel to, or use the word truth, you know, it's not parallel to some idea of truth that is out in the world. I do think that there's truth in fiction. When you think about any work of art, including, of course, what we think of as fiction, which is novel, you know, great novels, and we believe them, right? We believe them, and there's a kind of truth that's there, and I think human beings are designed to take that in. We're designed to take in stories. We're designed to, when we see marks on a surface, to see that stuff that's used as a transformation. You know, you make marks on a surface, we see it as something else. And we've done this. Well, I mean, you can look at cave paintings, go back 30,000 years, and we can look at them and still understand them, right? So there's a transformation that's very fundamental, right? But that said, this idea that it's somehow a truthful to the world, that's actually not true. That's us believing the fiction to the extent that we lose our sense of what truth is, right? You know, in terms of physical facts, right? But so it's, to me, all that, those things are all interesting, you know. Traditionally, you know, realism, we go back to, say, Caravaggio, you know, realism was meant to talk about the grit of humanity, right? But realism today often gets used in a kind of generic way to refer to just a work that is somehow representational and uses illusion. I tend to find, though, that work that, when the objective is only a kind of conventional idea of replicating illusion, and often it's just related to photography, that tends to be boring to me. I find the work most compelling when the artist is inventing. And there's this line that is clear and exciting, that is, it's fact, as in the fact of paint. It's clearly a paint. There's no denying it's paint, and yet we wholly believe it. And yet this couldn't happen. It isn't a parallel. It can only exist inside the painting. So I can't speak to whether this, you know, directly fits John's idea, but I do think that he gravitates towards work that is not about a kind of step-by-step representation in which every choice meets the kind of convention of correct, a kind of, yeah, I'll say conventional, a kind of conventional idea about what's right. You know, this is correct. So in terms of my own painting, I've been, in a way, painting the same painting over and over. And it's kind of ridiculous. It's so narrow, you know, and they come out of self-portraiture, but sometimes I'll have people who will sit for me. And sometimes I'll look at also, you know, great paintings. I also do have, there are some photographs I love. Like there's a photograph of, oh no, this is where I get into trouble. I drop names sometimes. Oh no, Dorothy Parker. There's a photograph of Dorothy Parker by Richard Avedon that she has most incredible bags under her eyes. And you know, I've like started a couple of paintings from that, and then the painting quickly deviates from that and becomes its own thing. But But in my case, I feel the characters in my paintings are basically the people who live in my paintings, and they're related to me. And they're related to self-portraiture, but it's not necessarily about me trying to faithfully, to use that your term, faithfully replicate my likeness, or faithfully conform to an idea about what representation should be. My hope is that the work can be mesmerizing. I hope that it's emotionally complicated, that you can experience it rather than just simply looking at it as an image. And my guess is my hopes for the paintings are probably similar to what my colleagues are as well.
Oh, thank you. It's kind of interesting having read up on the Mind's Eye project a little bit, with the people coming together and drawing into the self-portrait. Sure, I had originally imagined your work as having been more directly observed, of course, subjective, but then listening to your talk a couple weeks ago when you mentioned using a past painting or drawing and then start as a recreating into the next one to the next. It was really interesting to learn that bit of your process. Because they can kind of seem as different moods or characters in a way, but they are very rich. And
Thank
I
you.
can just jump in real quick, Michelle. I just wanted to say, and I really respect that idea that you're talking about of like not a direct mimesis of the subject itself. That notion that we truly are inventing, and I think this show, in particular, and John's book really gets at that point. Is that it's just so boring. It's like wow, it's like a party trick. Look what I can do. I can make it look just like the thing itself. And so I think that's really rich territory to explore. But I also can relate very much to your sort of ongoing project, if you could call it that, of just sort of letting one painting beget the next, beget the next. I was in grad school when I created what I thought was the greatest painting ever. And I was so disappointed after I did it, thinking it was just a bunch of tricks, that I took from you, believe it or not, your image taken from Art in America. I ripped it out of the book and I set it there, and I took it as a sort of stepping off point. I took a crappy Polaroid of my face and I thought, what could be more mundane than just a self-portrait? And I started the first one trying to figure out who I was as a painter, not a bag of tricks. To this day, I still own all those paintings, and every year I revisit the whole series of 85 paintings and paint on top of them. Someday, I hope someone like digs down with a microscope and figures out how many different layers are in there. Must be 20 layers of self-portraits on there now. Wow. And I did it the way you said, was I made my first painting, and what I got from that, I made the next one, and I just proceeded to do it from that direction.
Huh. Wow.
About stuff like that within my work, because a lot of it is about memory. And if you think about memory, it's not the memory of the event, it's the memory of the last time you thought of that event. And so it's really that kind of game of telephone with your own mind. And so for like Anne, it's with the image itself. Sounds like Craig for you too. And I think about that as I'm trying to tell my stories of trauma, dealing with my work, but it's really that memory of the memory and how that just becomes so abstracted the more times you kind of go back to that moment. So yeah.
Yvette, it's like Francis Bacon said, my paintings are blurred because my memories are blurred.
Yeah, exactly.
Of course, his memory was blurred from something other than just natural causes, or little bit of alcohol in there.
Oh. Yeah, no, that's great.
Well, if you think about memory, I mean, what we're dealing with is this thing that is fundamentally perceptual, and memory is part of that. The way that we understand the world is tied through this history of moving through the world and perceiving it with all our senses and thinking about it, moving it through our brains, and everything that we remember, it all folds together and becomes a kind of lens that we see the world through. And so it makes complete sense to me that you would be painting with, when you're working from memory, I think you're working from a kind of perception.
Mhm.
And the fact that you would be aware that there's sort of layers to that. I mean, even when you paint the painting, it's like you work on it, and then when you come back to it, you remember, you have the history of working on the painting that's part of your memory too, and your mind is in a different place, and it just keeps building in these layers.
Yeah. Well, and like, so I use my own children are my models. And so kind of like you were saying, it's like, but it's not about them. They are stand-ins for all these things. And so that kind of, to me, makes me think about what you were just saying with that. It's like, they're not even real. They just happen to be the object I use to build off of. And so, yeah.
But Yvette, never tell your children they're not real. That'll be the end of it.
Wow, let me tell you.
One of the things that, people have tried to ask me, what is disrupted realism? And I really, really want to be careful to say it's anything someone does. It's individuals, it's artists working it out their own way. I really want to respect individuality and not say this is a style that's going to have perimeters or it has rules. And talking about memory or talking about having models in the studio like Yvette does, having kids, I think there's paintings in this book and paintings that I'm seeing that they have memory, they have film scenes, they have models or still lifes that you can look at. They have bits of photography, they have digital imagery, they have glances. I think there's just all these different things that are settling into our psyche that we manage to get back out on canvas, all interspersed with each other. It's complicated.
I see that in all three of, I'm sorry, Teresa.
No, that's okay.
I think we all have this kind of collage and mix going on if I look at all three of our works. And so there's this disjunction that happens there.
So one of the things that initially drew me to John's book, it was recognition of things I was already interested in terms of storytelling. I just had never thought about it in quite the way that John framed it. And this narratives or the storytelling that I do, I'm interested in disconnect and disruption in that. Things that I see in Gabriel Garcia Marquez and the kind of real, unreal, imaginary, imagined, and where there's the physical world that we occupy doesn't have to limit the fictional space that Anne's talking about in painting. And the Lost TV series that was something else that, or films like Mulholland Drive, really present in my mind in terms of storytelling and the way that space and time can break, and where the ordinary and the extraordinary change places. And so that's a really, those general ideas really frame the ways I think about storytelling, and also I think the ways that I understand the world, and how my world is filtered. My paintings are the way I see the world, filtered through that notion. So kind of a little bit of a larger umbrella of how my paintings are conceptualized.
Could you maybe talk a little bit more about the portals? And you have this wonderful, this color warmth change, temperature change through the different portals. Would you talk about the series a little bit?
Sure. So the series of works that led to that were Tondos that in 2017 I began playing around with the circle, and it was largely on a whim. I found a pad of circular watercolor paper in Florence in an art store, and I just bought it, and then it kind of spurred ideas that the circle could be an island or a world or a window into something else. And it began a series of what is approximately 40 tondos that are roughly related in this kind of larger narrative story arc. But this particular painting, and I think it was Anne that just talked about experience in painting. And it was just at the very beginning before the pandemic, the beginning of 2020. when I was in Venice for an exhibition, and I read on Facebook that a close friend of mine that I'd gone to school with and we'd worked with together, a fellow painter, had been lost at sea. And his name's Dave Ngailamasang, and he's from Palau. And so being on the other side of the world, it was an actual, this disruption of my mental space, my physical space. The world was kind of cut in two. And just recognition of the temporality of life, and that he was never found after that. So that this loose ends. And so when I returned back to Michigan after that, and then the pandemic quickly unfolded, I came back, Italy shut down a week later, Michigan soon followed. And it was a very complicated time that I was trying to work out my grief over my friend's loss and the grief over the loss, the world, how it used to function. And looking back now, that idea of disrupted realism, like everything that I knew about the world had changed and was fractured. And so when I eventually was able to return to painting, and I needed to paint to honor my memory of Dave, my relationship with him, my friendship with him. And so the circle and that mirror is a reflective surface, both physically, but also reflecting the psychological interior. But I could see through that to the other side of the world. And the view of the main part of the painting is my bathroom. The mirror is what he would look out from his home in Palau, which I unfortunately never was able to visit him. And he was also a wonderful cook, showed affection for people by cooking for them. He never ate what he cooked when he made food for a big group of people. And so the little round form up top is a bowl of his seafood stew from above. And I feel like the circle and the things that it can symbolize about life cycles, connections between people, worlds, openings, entry points, is a shape that really resonated with trying to work out these complex emotional and existential, I guess, kind of thoughts that I was having at the time.
It's a beautiful piece. I'm really thrilled to have it here as part of the exhibit.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to say, Teresa, I think your compositional device of the circle within the circle within the circle, this kind of perpetual, what's that called when you put a mirror to another mirror and it just reflects endlessly? There's some name for that, but it kind of reminds me of that we're just perpetually moving through one space after the other. But often, the interesting part is that we're constantly being thrown back into this current space. So even when you get to that last bowl of food, it's so on the surface that you really feel like you're pushed back into the reality of where we are. It's almost like, talking about representational and realism, it's almost like the realest thing painted in there, right? Everything becomes more real each layer we get into, from the bathroom space and then into the mirror space, and then finally the bowl just kind of, bam, you're back here again.
Sure. I think that question of what is real is an interesting question, and maybe that multiple things can be simultaneously true and real, even if they contradict each other, which is something I find really exciting about the space of painting and the space of storytelling.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about blue? Like I see in this painting, and I also see in the painting behind you, this kind of blue world.
Yeah, I'm really drawn to, and I don't know that I can explain why, but that kind of space in between blue and green. My daughter and I have arguments about whether that's green or blue. And she says blue, I say green, but we agree on teal. I find it a really compelling color, and I'm not sure that I can describe why, but it seems to, I'm really interested in color and how it can activate the senses, evoke ideas in mood. And I think that one thing I'll also say about this series of Tondos is all of them, I've just put a layer of flash on to the vinyl sign paint that's very matte, but it comes in really brilliant colors. And this circle had just happened to be a very vibrant green. And so some of the warm tones, I was reacting against that. And then the green that's in the space of the bathroom is trying to amplify the density and intensity of that blue-green.
So Yvette, you talked about using your children as models, sort of as an armature maybe for your own memory or an experience. And you have all of this wonderful play with pattern and the greens of the grass creeping up on the feet, even though we're on top of the blanket. I mean, there is so much going on here, and the playfulness of the mask. Can you?
You know, for me, my work overall, like everyone, has gone through these transitions. And so I'm at this weird kind of teetering between the work talking about my experiences as a child sexual abuse survivor, and then having 3 children, all girls, that are 6, 11, and 14, and kind of watching them grow up, their experiences of harassment, of sexualization as children, you know, policing of their bodies in middle school, these types of things. And so there's this real transition that's kind of happening into the kind of stories that I am telling. That's, you can see behind me too, it's a new type of narrative happening. But this one kind of goes back to more kind of playing from my own experiences, and really, you know, I like to use pattern as a sense of way to kind of flatten the space. And to me, that speaks of kind of remembering that, you know, we can only go so far back. If we think about a specific moment, the details are all kind of, everything's surface, everything's right here. And so when I have these patterns, even though, you know, we see this this sky behind them, these plants and things, everything still is happening right here. And if I think back to moments, I don't think of the details surrounding, it's just everything that's right on that surface. So for me, the pattern acts as that kind of razzle dazzle camouflage that exists, where there's a lot of things going on, but we still, things are hidden within that. And the use of, you know, when the figure on the left, you know, is revealing that kind of extended space, you know, that it is this blue sky, that to me is part of that disruption we're talking about. That, you know, if you are a child in a traumatic experience, you know, there's this disassociation that occurs. And so you think of that other, that it's not about what's right here, it's about what you are hiding from in the blanket, that security of this blanket, what you can escape to within that. And I love, you know, the organicness of some of the ways that I come up with the ideas for the pieces are really through observation of my children and how they're playing and the things that they create. You know, so that paper mask, I mean, my daughter, she made that for a total other reason for herself. She calls it her Groot mask, which it looks nothing like Groot to me, but to her, that's what it was. And, you know, I loved the idea of recreating that because it's so authentic to that age. And if I think about when I painted her in this piece, was the age that these experiences happened to me, and that innocence. And, you know, as an adult looking back, it's a whole other thing of kind of, you know, we don't have to get into all that too much, but, you know, it's like when you see that age, you think of how small you are, and, you know, I'm one voice of many. And so that's kind of another aspect of the work is just kind of, I don't mind talking about these things. And I find that the reaction oftentimes is people might not go right to the heart of the intent of why I'm making my work initially, but they can see that there's, you know, there's this discomfort, something is not right here. And I think if that can come through to, in the beginning, then it's starting the job of the work. And then I can, of course, speak more. But using that mask, you know, it's like what we reveal. You know, we walk around town, nobody knows everything that has happened to everyone. And so when I do lectures and things and talk about statistics of assault and, you know, abuse and these types of things, we know there are other people in the room with the same experiences. And so, so we often are walking around, we have this facade, you know, and so masks, of course, are an easy way to do that. For a child, it's not the same, but I can think about how many years I spent not speaking about this, not, I talk to more groups than my own family about trauma that has happened. So, that's kind of the push behind the work, just kind of in general. And so having my children be the models, they have really helped me see those ages and kind of express those ages that, events have happened to myself. Now, my eldest is 14, so she is probably done, even though there's so much to talk about that age right now. And I'm really interested in exploring that within kind of these ideas, but we'll see what she wants me to do.
Oh, thank you.
So I was going to say kind of what we were talking about before too, is that, I pull from, I collage within these images and pull from other artists and other sources. And I think that, if we're speaking about being artists of our time, I think we're all really doing that. And it's not about this idea of, we talk a lot at the university about appropriation and teaching students, that idea between plagiarism, appropriation. And I think we're just all kind of skirting these lines, but that's the way we see and visualize the world today too. So it's like pulling from these things and creating that new. I think we're just so bombarded with that imagery that for it to come through in the work, and for us to have this layering is really natural.
One of the things I love about this painting is that before hearing your description of it, the things that it kind of conjured for me was this like play acting, theatrics, or adopting identities, the way that children do, and feeling out like, who am I, or who am I who I am. And I find that the patterns and the kind of that skyscape in the blanket really amplify that sense of wonder and mystery about who I am and who I will be. And I think that there's a kind of openness to that question that's really interesting to me in this work.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
And I think you're muted if you're.
I was ready to go, man.
Yeah.
I know. I'm struck with this painting by this quality that is both it invites a kind of looking from us at this scenario that feels very strange, and so looking at something that is odd and not in a, I don't know what's the term. I mean, you can call it surreal, but the artist who comes to mind is Diane Arbus, who's a photographer.
Uncanny, maybe?
Yeah, uncanny. But then when Diane Arbus comes to mind, there's this whole complexity about how her work is received, which is, I think, a response to a kind of strangeness that she would catch with her camera, but also a discussion about point of view and whether she had the right to take those pictures.
Yeah.
And so in these, I mean, there's, of course, there's that those twins that she photographed, which is, there was a mood to this that made me think of that. But this is, it's got that kind of feeling, which is disconcerting. But then it also has, there's something else there, which is more interior, which is not, it's like looking at and then looking back, but then it's not so much that we're invited to simply look at these two children as strange figures for us to inspect. There's a kind of I keep using the same words. It's sort of penetrating and disconcerting and peculiar. And it's even things like the blanket's held up, but when you look in the blanket, the sky is there. And their proportions are wacky, like have fat arms and tiny legs. And and we have this very kind of adult gaze of the girl who's seated, and yet they're both clearly children, right? I mean, it's a very odd painting. And I don't have a focused like conclusion to draw. Just, I remember thinking Diane Arbus, and then, but not. It's something other than that, because it's also interior rather than just us looking at.
And I wish you'd run the crits when I was in grad school. That was magnificent.
Was it? I feel like it was really disoriented, actually. But I'm not going anywhere with this. I think it's a really strange painting. I wish I could see it for real. You know, it's this stuff where we look at everything in reproduction. It's frustrating.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I know, because when you see it at scale, you know, yeah. Well, I'm surprised how often in my body of work that I will have one of the figures like staring out and confronting you. And it's not, and it's something that I don't think about as I'm making them, but there's usually, if there's multiple figures, one is always right there, like you're invited in, but like you're saying, like there's this protection. Oftentimes, like it's an older, one of the older children kind of hiding the other one, or, you know, something like this. And so, but they know that you're watching, they know you're a witness to this, and you're part of that. And so I like that that discomfort that can happen. I did this series where I took like illustrations from children's books from the 40s, 50s, 60s, and cropped them specifically so that children at play suddenly were in these sexual positions that was a complete innocence, but the way, you know, we became the voyeurs in that. And so they're doing nothing wrong. Same thing here. These kids, they're there. There's nothing, you know, wrong about that. But the way that we portray that we put our experiences in that, suddenly it becomes very uncomfortable. So I like doing that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So this beautifully rendered, glowing figure who's actually, besides the obvious, the obstruction of the gestural and the mark making of the purple and the black, he seems to be missing part of his head. He seems to the hairdresser, I think, took part of it too. I don't know. Can you talk about the series, Craig?
Yeah,
For
sure.
us,
So
please.
I think you'll find that you're quite correct in your analysis there, that the hairdresser has taken part of his head. So the piece actually comes from a larger body of work that's called The Success of Failure. The idea for that body of work was generated when one of my mentors, and really one of my great heroes of the painting world, Bailey Dugan, came to my studio, and she took one look around and she said, "Do you ever feel schizophrenic in your painting practice?" And I took that as a compliment, but I think she was actually being critical of me, because I tend to work on sort of multiple bodies of work, and the modalities and the language I use is very different. But I thought, oh, that's a really great idea. I should drill down on that. Instead of doing multiple bodies of work with different approaches, why don't I just put it all into one? And I can kind of talk about my life looking both backwards and forwards as a revisitation and rehearsal for my success at failure. I've been really good at failing. So in the whole body of work, I'm basically using image and form against one another as they try to reach some sort of telos and bring about some kind of resolution that maybe happens at moments, and maybe is very complex and only tentative. So then this particular piece comes from a portrait of my brother's father-in-law, Tom. And Tom is a really stoic man. He's quiet, intelligent, reserved, and he's a blue collar worker, worked really hard, raised 3 children with his wife, who happens to be a hairdresser and had a hairdressing salon in their home. And Tom just never got the respect that I thought he deserved when I was around him. And so this painting is really based on that idea that what I did was try to portray him in a very reverent manner through both the kind of luminosity and paint technique and the angle of view and the lighting. But the people around him, wife, grandchildren, daughter, son-in-law just didn't really have what I thought was the due respect. So what John so eloquently described as a sort of crashing of this one image against another is the purple thing is a child's drawing. So Yvette, I can relate to your whole appropriation of your children's drawings, but this is one of his children's drawings of a chicken. And in doing so, I tried to deface the hairdresser's husband, therefore the title, and kind of disrupt that sense of respect in it. And then simultaneously, it's got a kind of metaphoric component to it, and the whole body of work does, in so much as I've always been highly distrustful of this illusionistic thing that we can do as artists. I find it, very suspicious. And so the whole body of work was really about this idea that coming from the Philadelphia area, a location steeped in sort of representational figurative painting, and that, I grew up with this notion of what good art was and good painting was, had to be this like direct replication of what you were seeing. And I just always was suspicious of that. And while I worked really hard to build my skill levels to be able to do that, I've always just not sort of trusted it, and have always tried to throw my paintings into crisis. So that's also this idea of the success of failure, right? So I succeed at one thing only to realize I failed at another. And in this whole body of work, I try to bring those two things together and clash with one another.
Craig, I've got to tell an anecdote, because when you said mixing modalities, you hit on an idea that's really important to me. And a story I like to tell is I was a busboy in a restaurant in college, and for maybe a day and a half, I was being trained to be a pastry chef. And that totally failed. Talk about the success of failure. But I think one of the cooks kind of liked me, and he took me in the kitchen and said, let's take you to, teach you to make pastry. Anyways, I was terrible at it. But one of the lessons I got in my day and a half before they put me back in the main restaurant was we were mixing this big, big bowl of some kind of pastry. And he told me, he said, never mix it all the way. He said, when you're baking, he said, leave a few lumps, leave some texture. He said, because that'll make it good. And oddly enough, that's an idea I've really applied, I think, to painting. And it's there in this book, the idea that when things don't entirely combine, that's interesting. Where they collide with each other, where they clash, that's an opening into the painting. And one of the things I've really become convinced of, and this applies to traditional realism, it may not give people an opening. It may not give the viewers a way into your world or into your ideas, but when you have a clash or a crash or a disjunction, people see a little door open.
Yeah,
and they
it's
walk
almost
in.
so tight. It's closed down and claustrophobic in that way. You can't even find a crack in it. But that idea of, creating some sort of crack or some sort of fissure in the work through imagery or painterly application or whatever it might be, that's sort of that humanity, right? It's that recognition that we really aren't gods after all. We really can't recreate the world despite what you might believe. So I like that idea very much, John.
I like that idea that shows, like, what you're saying is it shows the kind of handmade. Like whenever I do collage, I make sure that you still see some of the text from where I cut something out, that, I don't any longer take a Sharpie to the edge when I'm doing physical collage, so, because I don't want it to look like it was made on the computer. And so like that evidence of that hand becomes so important. That's that disruption. Yeah.
I also like what you said, Craig, about throwing a painting into crisis. Those are the more interesting paintings to make, or stories to tell, or however you want to look at it. But I like that as a notion.
This doesn't seem like a time in history when anything should be crisis-free.
I don't know how you guys are in your practice, but I know that as I've matured as an artist, I've become more trustworthy of my abilities. And so, I tend to, years ago, I worked for this artist as an assistant, and the way he started all of his giant canvases was to wash his brushes out on. So he's making one painting while he's washing his brushes, and then that became sort of the underlayment for what he would create. And since then, you know, I've always thought of this idea of how can I constantly throw the work into crisis, and for the longest time I didn't trust myself, so it was always just this kind of forward momentum. I start here, I end there. But now I'll be in the middle of the painting, I'll be like, just throw something on it, let it go to hell and see what happens. And I love like, if you ever watch the videos of the artist Adrian Genie, you know, he literally takes gobs of paint in his hand and just throws them from across the room and just, you know, splatters all over the painting. It's kind of, you know, it's very machismo, but it's also quite fantastic and fun.
Something I say to my students all the time. I'm like, just destroy it. Like, if they can get that earlier, they will be so much better off than, you know.
Yeah. But boy, don't you just love their reaction when you say something like that? What? Are you crazy? No.
Exactly.
Oh my, we do our best.
A colleague of mine who's a wonderful painter, her name is Candida Alvarez, and she is she's an abstract painter, although sometimes her work goes in and out. But she, a few years ago, visited my studio and she began to talk about the navel of the painting, which she was in my paintings talking about a navel, but actually she was talking about it much more kind of broadly, metaphorically. And she was talking about it like a kind of umbilicus, where it's that moment where the outside connects with the inside. And she was referring to this moment where you actually could see right to the ground, and it really connected you with the touch and the layering of the paint, and then this, what it really literally was, and then building up to become something else. And you know, you're talking about all these different ways to kind of crack things open, or the term disruption. But I do think that it has something to do with an area where you can enter, and it's actually the antithesis of illusion. It's something else. And I think one of you, I can't remember which one of you, talked about the artist's hand. Maybe it was that. And that's where it's that sense of touch where we can, as people who look at paintings and people who paint paintings, we empathetically and tactily connect with the making of the painting, so we can feel the touch, right?
Yeah. And I always think of your paintings like, even though many of them are adult-looking people, bodies of adult people, I always think they look like they've just been freshly born. Like they're almost like birth images. And so that idea of the inside outside, right? And I've never seen a newborn baby. Obviously, some of you have, but I imagine their skin is pretty translucent at that point, and there is this kind of interior, exterior element that happens. And that's really, you know, when I knew of your work from reproduction, but then I first got to see it in a museum, the Aldrich Museum, in that bodies show you were in many years ago in Connecticut. And I just walked up to it and I just thought, oh my God, this person's being born right in front of me. And I think that moment of birth and that vulnerability and that interior, exterior thing is definitely present in your work for sure.
Make sure to look up some of the paintings that she's done of her son, Max, or that she did when he was born, and it will take you further into that idea. They're marvelous.
I've seen them, John. They are, I mean, I've never seen them in person, but I've seen them in reproduction, and yeah, they are. That's right. It's right there. It's that moment of, and so this idea of cracking open, right? And freshness, just like getting back to the origins of something. So somehow that's what it is. And as your work feels like it's some sort of origin story in there, like this thing is just coming into being right at the moment I look at it.
You guys are getting so mythological, because I was thinking, oh yeah, the Omphalos stone, you know, the belly button of the world, where you would go and you'd get answers, you know, you'd get riddles, you know, to take you into mystery. This is cool. I like where you took this.
It's nice. I mean, it's nice to have my own work talked about, but I was really thinking about your chicken. And that's where I was going.
Of all things to be thinking about, my chicken.
And I was also thinking about the connection in Teresa's painting, where she goes from full color into that blue. And you know, this moment where things collide, and so you actually see the literalness of what you're doing. like in your chicken, you know, which now I'm remembering, right? Because we're not looking at it as a screen share anymore. You have this funny thing that happens where, and so the first thing I was thinking is that must be really tricky to try to paint a child's drawing. Like
Right, Yvette?
that kind
Yeah.
of, that kind of replication. But you have the line of the chicken going over the face, but then the outside edge of the chicken coincides with the outside edge of the face, which is like a no-no, right? It totally flattens it. And so you have this illusion, and then you completely screw with the illusion with that. And it's not just the drawing on top of the face. It's like you just would never artfully do it that way because it completely disrupts the space of the painting. And
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You're right, Anne. And that's exactly what I did is I, just slipped that body and head of the chicken behind as the scribble continued on top of it. And this idea, and I bet you're, in your piece, you probably have experienced this as well, is that the idea of replicating even the medium by which that drawing was made. So I've tried to make oil paint behave like magic marker and ink pen. That was a real fun challenge as well to play with, just a technical challenge.
yeah,
Absolutely.
Back to the chicken, I think one thing that's compelling about it is that it, even though it does, to me, even though it's a chicken, it feels like it has objecthood without being nameable. And the way I read it, that scribble was this more, even though it's kind of this curly Q, soft mark, it was an aggressive act over the face, where the more aggressive mark almost caressed the cheek. And I found that to be an interesting contradiction.
That's a really nice take on it, and that was definitely in my mind the whole time. Is there was this kind of aggressiveness to the drawing in that curly Q point, and I've used several of these childhood drawings in the whole series of this body of work, and I'm using them for that kind of pure, raw, expressive quality that they have, that sort of unmediated expressiveness, whether it's a kind of frustration that I might be seeing in it, or some kind of joy or bliss in it. And that coupled against all of these different sort of modalities of expression, from symbolism to metaphor to, so all these paintings are sort of they're also trying to like combine all of these different ways that one makes meaning in a work of art, visually speaking. But yeah, that's a great take on it.
Can we look at that painting behind you?
Me?
Yeah, you have this painting back there, which I'm very frustrated. I want to see it.
So part of it's hidden behind my chair here too. It's 66 inches tall, 40 across. I'm working on a series of paintings. As Michelle talked about at the beginning in the intro, I'm Mexican American, and with the last several years, particularly since the rise of the 45th president prior to the election, really trying to reconcile myself and my identity as a multicultural brown person. And so this is a part of a new series of works that I'm doing that have to do with race and identity. And the woman in the painting is a former student of mine who is inspired by Zora Neale Hurston's How It Feels to Be Colored Me. And so the painting is a reflection of her understanding of herself through that writing. It's
You have a way of
setting in Michigan, and so I'm
yeah. You have a way of putting so this is too is like trying to look at something through reproduction, which is always frustrating, but you have this way of putting the paint down, from what I can tell. I mean, I'm speculating because I can't see the physical thing, where every mark seems to be really blunt, and I mean, yeah, it's like so there's this certainty, right? Like boom, 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 boom. And I look forward to just seeing the way your touch, because like I'm looking at that weird little burst of water,
yeah,
and the kind of patterning of paint, and then the way that relates to the hair and then the texture of the shirt and how it's all just paint.
Yeah, I really love paint, and the way you're talking about it is how I think of it. I'm not really interested in precision and depiction in a photographic sense, but in the way that paint in itself and its tactility, its sensuality, both is its thing. It is paint, and it suggests something else. And so, yeah, when you see my work in reality, not close, there is a lot of texture and almost like interested more in how things feel and how they look, as opposed to the superficial quality of how things look, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
And my words tend to be a little more clumsy than my painting, so I feel like the painting can maybe sometimes speak for itself.
That's why we make art.
Yeah, oh, that's true. It's why we really want people to come in and experience the works in person, because the experience of being in front of a painting, whether it's small or large, whatever, it's going to be different than looking at a screen, and really you get invited in, and the textures and the layering and everything it's so much more rich in person. I'm thrilled to have the opportunities to put on these online, platforms and viewing rooms now. Because of COVID, this has opened up, but anyone who's able to come in safely should do so and see these wonderful paintings. I would like to share a few of the installation views, because I mean, there's so many incredible works of art in the show, and I walked last Friday through with John just to kind of give him the in-person experience as much as possible in the gallery. And I mean, John can speak about it more, but it was not an easy decision, was it? There were so many wonderful things.
Actually, I'm in a funny mood right now. After this talk, I'm thinking, wow, we chose well.
We did
But
choose.
that lets the rest of the show go. But you're absolutely right that it's a varied show, which really pleases me. There's so many different approaches and so many different personalities. There's so much different scale in the show. There's so many different formats of painting. So it was a little overwhelming, honestly, to be walked through on Zoom, but I'm going to say overwhelming in a good way. It really did make me wish I could be there.
This one.
Looks nicely hung.
Thank you.
The sheet of mail. Yeah.
And a previous show I worked on had been too dense. There had been too much work. And this one, to me, it looks like it has the space. So every work of art has enough room to be seen on its own terms. It looks like it fits into the gallery just perfectly. And I'm sure part of the credit for that goes to Michelle and her staff, who hung it very thoughtfully and very sensitively.
Thank you. We have some more. I feel like I might be losing things under our faces, but it's hard to tell with the Zoom share. It's just really some incredible paintings. We're not a huge gallery, but we do try to use our space well. I like things to be able to breathe and not be claustrophobic, so you can experience the different works.
Michelle, I think you told me that with COVID guidelines in place, that 8 people at a time can be in the gallery. And, I think inadvertently, I think that's quite wonderful. The idea of 8 people in this space, they're going to have a very, serene experience of the show and lots of room. So we're all thinking of Michigan. We know Michigan is having a surge and there's a lot to worry about. But I just think the people who are able to enter this gallery and see the show are going to be given a real treat. They're going to be given a lot to think about, and they're going to have the space to do it. So I really hope it's a beautiful experience for everyone who comes by. And I also just want to say, just as kind of a parting note, I have a friend that's also a curator that I was talking with recently, and she said to me, she said, curators, she said, we're really the bean counters. And I thought, that's good. You know, I really like the egolessness of that. And although I'm very proud of the book and I'm very proud of stringing together some ideas, I'm especially proud of the artists because the artists and their work are the show. And this has been, you know, I feel good at the end of the day if artists' work is seen because of some of the efforts that, you know, Michelle has made or I have made. And of course, Anne helped me too. We did a final Zoom. I was out on the deck with my dog in my lap, and Anne showed me a few pieces that might have escaped my notice. So I'm very grateful to having some help in the final cut of the show. But I'm rambling. That must be what a long Zoom does to me. But just thank you to everybody, and it's an honor to work with all of the visual artists involved.
Michelle, I just want to say thank you too for, you know, for you and all the galleries there for actually putting a show in person on despite the limitations of crowd sizes. I mean, I probably speak for everybody else here today, but really we just want our work to be out in the world and living, not sitting in our studio and online all the time. It's good to have it online too, but to actually be able to see it amongst these other pieces feels really rewarding. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. And thank you for sending it all this way, because it's really, it's important to me to be able to have this here. And really with all the restrictions with COVID and so few gatherings that people are able to have, this really is a safe, you know, everyone wears their masks, everyone's able to come in with and have plenty of distance. Our limit is 8, but I think we've only ever had 8 in at one time once during this time. You know, it's over, it's, you know, people are in and out, and it's really been a great place for people to come and enrich their lives during this time of uncertainty. So with that, I say thank you to all of you for joining me here today and sharing your work with myself and our community. I thank all of the artists who have worked in the show and for everyone who submitted to the exhibition. This will be up through May 15th, and we hope you'll come visit us. Thank you.